and gentlemen, welcome back to the World Big Data and Analytics Show. My name is Bhavna Bhatia, and right now we are on our final discussion, which is on data management, cloud, and data platforms. Well, it is not only important how you manage your data, but how and where you store it. Cloud has definitely been the forefront of the shift in data storage, and now data platforms are increasingly becoming deployed in these environments. We're looking at talking about focusing on critical use cases for your company's data, identifying owners and stakeholders for each data management function, identifying the right tools or platforms or technology solutions essential to building a data management strategy, knowing the business opportunity and challenges that cloud and data platforms create, making use case driven, efficient, and scalable data platforms with Kubernetes and Flyte, the role of AI ML in modern data management, and also who powers the AI, ML, and analytics strategy. Is it the platforms, cloud vendors, or the specific big data solution providers? Well, to this and much more, it is now time for me to introduce to you our panelists. First up, we've got joining us on the stage and screen is Carol Hargreaves, the Director of Data Analytics Consulting Center, National University of Singapore. Well, Carol holds a joint position as an associate professor in the Department of Statistics and Applied Probability and the Department of Mathematics. Her research area includes artificial intelligence and machine learning applications in healthcare and the financial industry, amongst others. Thank you so much, Carol, for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Likewise, great having you. Also joining us now on the stage and screen is Hong H. Ong, the Head of Data Science and Analytics, Bank Negara Malaysia, Central Bank of Malaysia. Well, since completing his PhD in distributed operating systems in 2004, Hong has been pursuing the use of disruptive technology and advanced data analytics to solving industrial problems. He's somebody who's contributed extensively to the industry through 52 filed patents, 2 book chapters, and 80 referred papers. Thank you so much, Hong, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I look forward for the discussions.
Likewise. Joining us now is Francis Adrian Vernes, the Chief Analytics Officer and Chief Data Scientist, Advanced Tech Lending. Well, with years of managerial experience with multinational teams, Francis is recognized global data science author. He's somebody who's taught data science, finance, and economic subjects in 3 of the big 4 schools in Manila. Thank you so much, Francis, for joining us today.
Thank you as well, and I'm very excited to be in this panel.
Likewise. Now joining us on the stage and screen is Akansha Rastogi, Head of Data and Insights, Food Panda. Well, Akansha leads a team of data scientists and analysts. Her role comprises ensuring effective and productive data utilization by creating tools and products and advocating data-backed decision-making in all internal departments. Thank you so much, Akansha, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
And ladies and gentlemen, with this, it is now time for me to introduce to you the moderator of this panel discussion. Joining us on the stage and screen now is Philippe Schalf, the Director of Data Science Prudential PLC. Well, a seasoned AI and a big data evangelist, Philippe has been leading the data science capabilities in the Asian African for growth market, Jagonnathe Prudential. While building bridges between science and business, he's somebody who's an ardent evangelist of customer-driven learning loops and collaborative approaches to technology enablement. Thank you so much, Philippe, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Bhavana, and also thanks for enabling us to put together such an excellent team of debatants. We are really looking forward to a very exciting discussion today.
Great. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, you've got your eminent panelists on your stage and screen. If you may have any questions directed to this panel, please post it up in the Q&A section. We shall pass it to the panel at the end of the session if time allows. With this, I'd now like to leave the live reins to Philippe, who's our moderator, to take it forward with his able panel. Over to you, Philippe.
Thanks so much. We will start with a very high-level overview. Obviously, it's a very complex space with many topics in between. And on the top of the pyramid, we're kind of having AI, machine learning, analytics strategies. And then there's a whole pyramid of things underneath to make all that work, right? So typical players in that space could be internal expertise teams, could be platform providers, cloud vendors, or specific big data solution providers, right? And the question that we're going to look at first is, who in your eyes actually powers which part of the AI, machine learning, and analytics strategies, right? We're going to start with Akshana and then go through the participants.
Sure. So in my perspective, what powers an effective AI ML strategy is first to ensure that it's designed towards the business objectives that you're trying to meet, right? And then all of the other partners are just going to sort of align themselves beautifully like a jigsaw puzzle to help you in the end meet that objective, right? You could be a business with a current scale, a very different ambition, and how you move and navigate that journey is almost an art more than a fixed formula science, right? And so the solution is typically determined by carefully assessing your options, what kind of cloud providers you want to go to, what kinds of products and services you expect this AI ML to power, and what is the end user consumer experience that you're aiming for, right? Is it that you want there to be a microsecond lag, and therefore you have to really go for powerful investments and heavy infrastructure that's backing these tools? Or do you want the experience at the end does not matter, but the accuracy at which your models are working is much more important to you, and therefore you would spend much more time sort of investing in infrastructure is fixed, and it's basically helping you train your AI ML models to the extent that you are able to achieve the precision that you're going for.
Very much driven by the customer, by the use cases at hand. Francis, what do you think? How do you see the different players in that space interacting, the different solution providers?
I actually have the same answer as Akanksha, right? I can actually bring in two examples from my work experience. I used to be the head of data analytics for, let's say, real estate, and for real estate, well, it's always with a conjunction with the or in collaboration with the business goals, right? But as the head of the data analytics, or whoever is in that power who's supposed to be taking care of the analytics strategy, right? You have to assume that person has or exerts some type of power, but the degree to which he or she extends that power differs according to the industry. So for example, for real estate, where real estate is not really tech native, meaning that you can actually do carry on a company without having to employ very complicated analytics, a lot of that power sits with the CEO, for example. And well, the use cases will also likewise be influenced by, okay, how much are we saving? Or are there a lot of alternatives for us to compare? Or if we do enter into the offensive one, like consulting, for example, do our customers see the value enough for them to pay the premium for it? So that's for the real estate. Currently, right now, I am in fintech, wherein definitely I hold a lot of those powers. But at the end of the day, it's still the CEO. So even though I have more influence right now, the CEO would lay out the ground like, okay, we want to be able to produce a state-of-the-art finance app that would be able to eliminate these problems. So the general direction would have to come from them. And while I do exert some powers to employ a lot of those technologies, the bottom line is it's always in conjunction with someone with the general strategy, and usually it lies with the CEO or COO. It's just that the person who's driving the analytics strategy has a varying level of influence depending on the industry. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very focused on what are the different roles, and that's a very exciting topic we'll be diving a lot into that as well. We've seen a lot of discussion in society recently in that dimension. Carol, you coming from a leading role in the National University of Singapore, what is your view on the different parties that are trying to enable everyone in the cloud space? How do they interact with each other? What are they really enabling?
Yes, so through my consulting, I've noticed that many companies have different focuses. And a lot depends on the type of data they are dealing with. How sensitive is the data is one. The size of the data is two. The type of the data is three. In a sense that if the data is simple and small, and not sensitive, the company is quite willing to use their laptops and analyze the data and store the data on the laptops. However, as the data becomes more complex and the types of technologies that they are using becomes more complex, needs a faster speed, and the data sources are very different, then of course they have to move to other platforms like the cloud. Because with the cloud, it's much more easier to get the speed at which they want the data to be crunched, as well as the different types of data sources. It's more easier to integrate it on the cloud than using a single computer. And so in general, in a nutshell, there are lots of different questions that we need to ask before we can consider where should the data go? How should we collect the data? Which platform should we store the data at? It's a whole pipeline that we have to look through from the time we receive the data to the time when the data is actually being used for a valuable purpose. So yes, there are questions about cloud. Should we use private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud? There are questions about which platforms, because sometimes there are external platforms that users want to use. Should we build our own platform, or should we rather use an external platform? And a lot depends on the business. Some businesses want to focus on their true business and get on with their true business, and then partner with other external parties to provide the other services where they feel they do not have the right skills to do those like cloud and other external platforms.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating, and obviously a big contrast. Now we have the data speaking and trying to see how much can we enable going from that, instead of saying, okay, there's a problem, let's solve it based on that. So we can already see some approaches emerging, two almost diametral approaches emerging here. We've got one more person who can be our tiebreaker on this, and he's especially experienced on handling sensitive data in a safe way, the safest possible way. Hong, what do you think on this point?
I think all the panel member has a very good view, and actually covers pretty much almost everything that one need to sort of consider when it comes to the strategic part. I agree with Francis. Any company, when you want to embark on this AI ML journey, big data journey, one really need to understand where is the end game here, where are they going precisely, for who. So the role of the person who's going to use the data is actually very important. The kind of business that you are working on across different industry, very different. One from e-commerce, one from maybe university, the other one is like more government oriented. The position they take is very, very different, in terms of the data strategy, in terms of the audience that they're going to be serving. Once that is actually considered, I think the second important point is, again, there are other things to consider. Is now, for example, budgets. Particularly, I think budget is another concern, and also the talents, whether you have the sufficient talents and things like that, right? It's not a small job for the strategic person. I don't know what's their name called these days. You can call it chief data officer, chief data analytic officer, CIO, CTO. I don't know. There's a lot of names I've been calling, but whoever in charge of that particular positions, I think they need to really think out, the whole entire spectrum of here. Then once you have the strategy part, is really looking at how to implement it. And then where Carol was talking about is really playing the part, what type of data you have, what kind of platform you want to use. And then finally, I will add one more thing to it is governance. Who is going to be making sure that you are actually doing the right things? And so this is also a very important, I would say, a person, the person usually will be different from the chief strategist. It will be most probably the person who hold the data management and data governance person that actually will have to come in and say, we need to follow process. Especially in my industry, supervisory regulation is actually very, very important.
A very skillful tightrope walk almost between being grounded in reality, knowing what's possible, and dreaming about the opportunities. And that beautifully leads us into the next area we're going to consider, namely, are there any applications in the cloud, big data sphere, new technologies that you see emerging, or technologies that have been around for a while but have not yet reached their full impact on society that you can see will have a strong impact on our lives? And what do you think will these specific technologies change? Akansha, what do you think about that?
Okay, yeah, so I would start by saying that data and all the tools that tech has now made available to us has really revolutionized the amount of personalization, the amount of information that you can ingest and know about a customer at a granular level. You think about the Facebooks and the LinkedIns of today, and it does give you the feeling that they do know you very, very well. And a lot of it has been enabled by all the technologies that are enabling us to crunch this data at scale in a phenomenal speed to translate it to actions as granular as what ad do you see, which is the best person to see that ad, and you're literally bidding in real time for what ad gets shown to whom. And in a way, you're sort of also in a very, very business-driven way, driving the response that you get to an ad. So it gives almost the kind of control over how you're using tech to drive your business, your conversion, your perception, your brand awareness, and achieving all those goals in a real-time environment so fast, so accurately that it's bewildering. We could not have thought of it maybe 15, 20 years ago, right? And the best part is it's not yet saturated. Everyone's sort of inching and moving towards how to make it even more accurate, even more targeted, even more personalized. And though it does seem today that, oh my God, we've come a huge distance, to me, it does seem like we have a lot more action coming in this place. We're just reaching the climax of how this phenomenal new application of data is being picked up, and increasingly it's becoming a huge business trend. It's like the new rave where every business wants to sort of take it forward. And think about it like this. We have now built tools over it, which makes this accessible to the smallest of businesses with the aspiration of having a consumer relationship, which is driven by their goals. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that comes to mind. On the social side, if I were to think of it, the entire COVID pandemic, when it swept over the world, and how everyone sort of responded by joining these data dots across the world, saying, okay, these are the exchange of information, how fast it went, the visualizations, the apps that came up, and sort of literally how not only doctors, but a lot of data scientists were also responding to the emergency, saying that this is how we can curb the pandemic to spread, right? And this is how we can understand this better and take action better. That was, again, to me, I believe that was a huge win, and one of the most beautiful examples of how you can actually use data to make human lives much, much better.
Really beautiful example there at the end. if I would pick up the two main pillars of your argument, I would say it's going towards the customer segment of one by listening through the power of data, but at the same time, gaining the speed to react faster. Hong, what do you think? What are the technologies that we can currently see unfolding that will have some strong impacts on society?
I think actually I agree with Kansa regarding this. So if you look at the similar thing, I think this is just the beginning rather than the actual end. Technologies certainly the deployment of 5G. That's definitely will be more 3D printings. It's going to be pick up a bit more even further. I know of certainly the use of AI, ML, as well as robots. It's going to be more prominent. But I think technology has been around for some time. It has been talked about. Even been showcased multiple times. But I think this 2 years is actually a turning point to enable more newer applications, right? So simply put, you can think of the something close to us, e-commerce, things that we buy, right? So because of the COVID-19, we can't go, and now you can go on online shoppings and get the delivery, order food. Imagine this about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. This is something that's not still, people say maybe it's a successful business, maybe not. But today there's no question about it. It can work, right? So that actually changed tremendously for our society, the way that we understand it. And data actually become even more important so that you can actually understand what people buy, where they live. A lot of different types of customization can be done per consumer basis, right? Second thing is actually change is the health, right? Well, COVID-19 again, we need vaccines, right? And you can see that the international researchers and doctors are actually collaborating together. And this is by enabling the sharing of data. We look at each other's data so that things are moving a bit faster. So this application in medicine, in health will be continuous, right? Last times, again, distance, we need to fly, we need to have a conference to talk. Today, nobody is going to question about telemedicine, right? About doing, having a doctor to see you remotely. It's not a question anymore, right? And the third one is actually more closest to me is actually in finance, right? Payments, e-payments is there, but e-payments has been there for some time. People talk about e-wallets, but from a technology perspective, it's been around. And because of the last 2 years, you can see the uptick of it. People are more comfortable using the e-wallets and so on. What is more exciting is after the e-payments, right? For example, you talk about this a digital ID, right? So you can actually validate your customers online without them having come to your shop, right? That's one thing. You talk about digital currency, right? So how you actually can use cryptocurrencies and so on to actually do transactions. Well, it's still an early day, but people are talking about it, and you can see that a lot of central bankings are actually looking how to actually implement it. What would be the best part, the worst part, and how to deal with all the the good, the good, the ugly, and so on. Right. So payments are finance is different. Even in terms of the business itself, right? You're looking at the loan, P2P lendings and so on. There are so many good examples are coming out on the daily basis, and all these are generating data, right? And because of that, you can actually automate a lot of work as well as actually understanding the consumer behaviors, and therefore you can actually customize your applications or your service to that sectors. Of course, people may argue whether you want to, give so much information to the authorities as well as for the company. But I think in overall, the life will be changed. I think thanks to the COVID, one thing is actually for sure, okay, I would say two things. Two things for sure is there are more data actually generated over the last 2 years. Second one is the psychology barrier. The psychology barrier to go digital is, over in this part of the world, in Malaysia specifically, we were talking about Industrial 4.0, how to actually, make the how to shift your manufacturing toward more digital applications and so on. right? Now it's no longer a question, right? The psychological barrier has been broken. People are very comfortable to move in, using internet, giving information on the internet. And therefore, I think moving forward, our life will be, it's a change. It's a turning point. Okay, that's all I think that's all I believe. I see.
Thanks for sharing this fascinating insight of you. It reminded me almost of Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction author, when he said, the future is here, it's just not yet evenly distributed. And certainly, as we already touched upon, a big part of that is acceptance. And acceptance is based in trust. So one of the really important areas of this is, how can we optimally protect the data while still keeping it usable? Are there any best practices arising in that space that we can share? Carol, what do you think?
Yes. So yes, for sure, we need to protect the data, especially now that there's so much integration of the data and many users for the data. So I'd say the first thing is the data governance, whereby the company or the digital officer needs to understand which people need access to which types of data. And so the company needs to understand the requirements by each person. Do they need the data and at what access level do they need it? So that's the first thing. The second thing is about, even though we have lots of data, the data may not be of the right quality. And so that comes into how can we ensure that the data is of good quality? Because if it's not of good quality, the rest of the analysis and the decision-making will be inaccurate. And in fact, data quality is a big chunk of the whole data management procedure. And so I would have recommend that many systems are in place throughout the pipeline or the movement of the data to ensure that the quality is of good quality. Next part in terms of trusting is that we need to understand the risk at each level of the project, because if the data gets into the wrong hands, then there could be a risk of maybe the company's reputation going down, or if the data is used by the wrong person, they could actually, make decisions and the wrong person might get the reward from that. So in order to protect and ensure that the data is does not go into the wrong hands, many companies, organizations have to have, I would say, some anomaly detection system in place, because with this detection, it will help to understand that when the data has been breached or not, when the data is in the wrong person's hands. So there are lots of bits that need to take place: data quality, the access rights, understanding whether there has been some fraud or anomaly detection. And so I would say essentially the right people need to be also put in place to work out the system, because there are many platforms, there are many areas within the data, the way it's used. So you need a team to better understand what would suit the company best in terms of these different areas. And the right team, the right people with the right skills is definitely, I think, high up on the list.
Very powerful. Assembling a real data squad here as a strategy of a main driver of ensuring the data safety at high quality standards. Akshana, how do you walk that tightrope walk between keeping the data safe, but also keeping it usable for the data scientists and the data executioners?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, we want to ensure data safety while maintaining usability. Okay, so this is a topic that keeps coming up, and increasingly and rightfully so now, because with data, we are increasingly becoming conscious of it being personal information, identifiable information, and maybe information that was I would not like someone to use, right? And it's as a consumer, it is my right to say that please do not use this information to target me, to engage with me, to even as much as reach out to me, and that is my right. Because and so there's an increasingly interplay between data availability and what you can actually use. And it's absolutely in the right spirit that we have more and more regulation coming in forms of GDPR and others, where you have government agencies regulating and carefully watching how data is being used, and customer interests are being protected. But as an organization, what can you do to ensure that data is used effectively but is not abused, right? So you want to definitely, as Carol mentioned, have controls on what data is visible to whom and for what purposes. I've seen organizations even go out to say that the explicit use of data needs to be stated before a certain data is made available to you. It will be made available for a certain window of analysis, and then the data would be removed, access would be gone, and it's no longer visible. We have increasingly now communications going out to customers to explicitly seek consent. So it's not implied, it's not in terms of contract. There are organizations which are making what kind of segmentations, tags, data, from where have I got that data, actually open to customers. You can actually go and figure out what did they get from where to figure out what about you. And I think that's extremely powerful. It's the right direction to go in. And those are the things that we need to make sure that are being made available to the end customers, or if you look at it the other way around, people who are being captured in these data points. At the end of the day, they're human beings and they have feelings, emotions attached. And so we need to respect that. As an organization, of course, we need to have much more clear defined roles, very clear ownership, very clear access-based rules and responsibility-based accesses that are defined and given to people, and they should be reviewed regularly, and they should be sort of managed top down, so that as an organization you're aligned and you're enforcing a clear safety policy on your data.
And that leads us straight into the next area. And that's something that, Francis, you had already soft opened in the beginning. All the different new titles we see now springing up. Suddenly there's all sorts of C personalities around data. How should the organization really structure the different roles we see around data ownership? How should that be distributed in the organization? And what would be the set of responsibilities we would see for some of these key stakeholders?
Okay, so well, we agree that there's a lot of C-suite titles right now, and there's a huge overlap with them. And I've seen even companies use, let's say, the word chief data officer and chief analytics officer quite interchangeably. We also have quite a lot, like chief technology and chief information officers. But really, the point of this one is to really find a way for us to define the issues that we've raised here. Like, for example, data governance. Who would tell what the type of data we collect, and then what the type of data we give access to people? It has to be a special role that is defined according to the company's policies, for example. And not only that, of course, so in certain companies, for example, let's say we are talking about a consulting firm, it makes sense that all the power would be for just one, for example, chief data officer, chief analytics officer. But let's say you're talking to, let's say, a fintech firm, and where security is more separated. I've seen a distinction where chief data officer is more of the data governance, where the chief analytics officer is more of the strategy. So with that, they really would need to lay down per title according to how they want to, let's say, treat it as detailed as they are. For example, in my real estate firm, because it's only one person, it's very easy to pinpoint that all of the data related concern will fall onto that person. But if an organization argues that, well, because this is a big organization or a different need, we need to have different titles, then governance strategies will have to be coordinated, because at one point, even the communication between those titles, there might be some information already that is already lost. And like, for example, how we deal with, in real estate, how we deal with data governance. One can say that, well, we can always aggregate and give different people, different analysts, different experience or supervisory level, the type of different views. So we've mentioned earlier contracts. So as we know, contracts have a lot of personal information. So what we may do is, well, if you aggregate it according to city, it's no longer, or maybe as the municipalities smaller than cities, it's no longer sensitive, right? But that call, it's easy to make because we only have one. In another case, for example, between the chief data officer and chief analytics officer, I've seen a use case where, since the chief data officer is supposed to be, and again, there's no general consensus about this, the one taking care of the data, what would happen if we have, let's say, and this is a part of data governance as well, how would we input data that has missing values, for example? Of course, the chief analytics officer may, because of the strategies that he or she may employ, we know that we can leverage new technologies like random forest or KNN to create, to fill in the missing data augmented, well, in augmented fashion or synthetically, right? So we can preserve the data, but a chief data officer might not see it that way. So those types of really, really critical information or critical decision goes unnoticed, but are very important in the way we handle data. After all, this is data management. So yeah, for those companies that have a lot of titles that are dealing with data, my suggestion would be they need to really sit down and like maybe do a design thinking session or a huddle that is very difficult to not as easy as if it's only lying in one role for, say, consulting firm. So yeah, but all of those issues that we've mentioned, and even as we are going along here, they need to really, really write it down, because for data management, once they done something like delete it or aggregate it, some type of information is lost. So before they do that, well, it's very obvious that planning should go first.
So clearly a trade-off between the cost of coordinating versus creating appropriate checks and balances, very focused on what industry the organization is in. And obviously we have one esteemed member of our panel here today who might be on the most extreme end with his organization. So it would be really interesting to hear about the golden standards in that space from Hong. What do you think? How does the ideal organization distribute the data ownership, and where is the trend going? What kind of responsibilities might we see popping up in organizations that we don't even have today?
Right. I think Francis has touched sort of a very pragmatic way of handling this. It really comes back to the size of the organizations. Right, a small size, you only have one person or half a person, to a certain matters, half a person dealing with the data and so on. But instead of, so I'm going to abstract it out and talk a little bit more on the sort of a bit large scale ideal situations. A large scale situation, essentially, we need to introduce the concept of the so-called the data life cycle. And then also the second concept is within the data ecosystems. Right? Who are the user ecosystems, essentially? So based on that, we can see that there will be the owner of the data, who actually collected those data, and then to who actually managing it, defining the governance, the management perspective of it, what is the right thing, what is the security level, to the so-called the data custodians, which is actually the IT departments, who is actually managing the infrastructure part, making sure, monitoring it, whether people actually break down. So that those will be the so-called the custodian of the data. And then finally, you have two other categories. One will be the user, the line department in our language, or is the line department. and then the data scientists or data analysis or statistic departments who actually use the data, crunch it, and then supply it to the users, and the user will pick it up. So within these ecosystems, you can define the roles and the kind of process that you wanted, so that to make sure. So this, who has the responsibility and who look after what in that sense. So it's a very complex ecosystems, right? In that sense. So technology itself is just to implement that complex ideology, so-called. It's very important that this ecosystem need to understand what can be done, what cannot be done, right? So that means what can be done, that with regulations and laws that actually protected you. So legal people need to come in and so on. And what you cannot do is essentially you don't break the law. It's first of all, and also regarding, like, I think Carol was talking about that kind. How you secure your data pipeline. Data pipeline is just like I would say like a gate, right? You go to a building where you have a different gate. So I think Malaysia tends to give you one card, you can go anywhere you want. But essentially, you cannot have that concept. You need to have a principle or technology or policy in place that certain people can actually access certain types of data. And when we talk about data, it has to be not so as a whole. It has to go into a granularity level, a fine granularity level, like the field of the data field. Can you access the data field instead of saying, I can get the whole entire database or the whole entire file? So these are the kind of things that I think all these ecosystems and the players in this ecosystem need to understand. And as the data actually move along changing from one hand to another hand, the classification of the data also change accordingly, right? So it could be from a very sensitive to a very generic data that you can share, or from a generic data you can actually put in or manage to so-called connect the dots to understand there's something sensitive and secret. So this is my view. It's a complex. I think we need more time to really dive into this particular topic.
Yeah, thanks for sharing a really, really comprehensive view, straight from the best practice area in terms of industries. Another member, really successful member of our panel, Akshanka, is working in a role in possibly the most innovation-focused industry you can be, right? And oftentimes innovations have been coming from that industry onto all the industry. We've learned a lot from that recently. Akshanka, what do you think? How does the ideal organization today distribute ownership versus how would many organizations in the state of tomorrow think about distributing the data ownership?
Okay, so as Francis and Hong both pointed out, right, a lot of these decisions today are being made in terms of your current structure and the size of the firm. Now, is that ideal? Maybe not, right? We probably across industries want to get a uniform scale and want to get clear defined roles which are delineated from each other, right? There's a clear conflict of interest if I also decide who's going to access the data and also decide how will we keep that data secure, right? And so if I were to wager some money on this, I think increasingly we will see that the next wave of regulations will bring out clear defined rules that organizations will have to maintain and sort of delineate in terms of responsibilities. So as Francis said, right, you can have very, very fancy titles which do not have very clear responsibilities attached, but I think we will have much more clear defined accountability. And I think that would be the next wave that should be coming in. I'm not sure how the panel feels about it, but that's my personal take.
Thanks for sharing this insider view. Now we've got around 1.5 minutes left. And one of the last open interesting areas might be, is it actually also a revolution that we're seeing in terms of AI not only being a main driver of security concerns, but actually helping the security function? We can see now algorithms that can dream up data and other technologies. Carol, what's your view on that?
Yes, so certainly they are the newest technologies today. One of my favorites, because I work a lot also with clinical trials, healthcare data, financial data. And one of the biggest deterrents is the privacy of the data. So in terms of research, it is very difficult to understand different diseases because the patient data is private and confidential. And I'm quite excited with this new technology, the generative adversarial networks, the autoencoders. These types of technologies allow you to synthesize the data in a similar way. So you'll have the real patient data, and what we can do is synthesize the data so that it's very similar to the patient data. And this helps in the sense that we can do further research, because instead of giving the patient data to do the analysis and the research and gain the insights, what we can do is give the similar data. And it's similar across all aspects, not just about means and medians and summary statistics, but also similar in terms of the distributions of each of the variables. And so we're finding that the analysis that has been done so far is really accurate, in fact, more accurate in cases where sometimes the data is also small because of the rarity of the disease. And so with the synthesis of this data that's similar, you're finding that the data set is much larger, which means the data set is more generalizable, and which means that we're able to also again get more accurate data. Because once we can use the original data, it's too small. The accuracy may be 50%. If we combine the data, we actually find that the accuracy actually streaks up right to 80+%. And so I know that the healthcare industry is very excited with this new technology, because it also helps in clinical trials. So many more clinical trials can actually be run in a much faster fashion as well because of this technology, because this technology is also really good in the classification of images, the classification of X-rays and CT scans and MRIs. And so it's really an exciting area that we are in the AI space, because, for example, I'll just quickly say that with the scoring of X-rays is very difficult. It's very subjective. And so with the GANs and the autoencoders, we're finding that it's more consistent, it's quantitative, and more accurate in classifying the X-ray, which means in classifying the patient as to whether they have a disease or not. So.
All right, thanks so much. We're 2 minutes above the articulated time slot. MC, are we ready for the handover?
Absolutely, Philippe. Thank you so much for that.